Maybe you are not clear what climate change is. I have said a lot of things so far, kids, but maybe it's time to add a little bit more specific things about climate science, climate change, what climate change is doing, and so on. So this chapter is called Melt Water and Heat Waves. What is melt water? We'll see what that means. So here we will read what the climate actually is. We already discussed it a bit. We'll read it again and why scientists need more pages than I do. In other words, what the author is doing in this book and why he's trying to explain everything in a small space. If you try to do it in detail, wow, it'll take a lot of pages. But you're children and you don't want to read that many pages. It's complicated science and so on. So why the North Pole is then melting faster than the South Pole? I already mentioned something, that is called ice albedo feedback, the vicious circle that the Great Lakes are at the bottom of a seesaw. Seesaw is, of course, you sit on two ends with your friend or brother or sister and you keep going up and down. You know the game. How thousands of plastic ducks once helped ocean science. So there are ships taking plastic ducks and shoes across the ocean in big ships, lots of containers, and sometimes they hit a storm and a container falls over and it wide open in the open ocean and everything inside starts to begin entering the ocean, and these things are made up of plastic and they don't rot in the ocean, so they just keep drifting around with the currents and then they end up on some beach eventually, and people can see where they came in and see what the currents did. That's some kind of a detective work as well. Okay, so we'll see which robots get a dunking every 10 days. So there are robots bobbing up and down in the ocean, and we'll see what they are doing and why we would better keep an eye out for hailstones. What does that mean? You already know what hail is probably. When it rains, sometimes you get chunks of ice falling. Sometimes they are nice and round, sometimes they are not. So we know what hail is, right? And what happens when the freezer defrosts? I think you know what we are talking about. There are deep frozen places in the world, and if they defrost, what happens? We'll see that. And about the tipping points and time bombs. What does this mean? Let's say you have a table and you have a little rolling ball on it, and you keep pushing it, and suddenly it falls over the edge and then cannot come back on its own, right? So this is called a tipping point. And time bomb, you know what that is? Means there is something that's waiting and time is ticking. At some point, boom, something big happens. So it's a ticking time bomb. In short, we'll look at the consequences of climate change. Not everything, but we'll see a few things to get you a sense of what's happening. So let's look at here a clock that is showing some kind of a barometer with pressure, and there is some change happening. So we are on this side where it is raining, and we are on this side where it's fair weather, and then high pressure means fair weather, no clouds, maybe sunny skies, and here it is low pressure and there is rain. Low pressure usually means bad weather, cloud, and so on, and then you are changing between them. So you can think of this as some kind of a seesaw as well, for example. And here is a yellow line running, and here you are on this side it's all dry, on this side it's all wet. So where are you going to end up if you have a ball that is, let's say, sitting here? If you give it a little nudge, maybe it falls here and just kind of oscillates back and forth and then settles in the bottom here, or it can go in this direction, or it can fall in this direction, right? So these are kind of a tipping points in the system. What are the tipping points in our climate system? Remember, a system is where you have many components that are interacting with each other to do something. What's the best system you can think of? You are a system. You have a digestive system, you have a skeletal system, you have a muscular system, you have a neural system, you have a cardiovascular system, and all the systems are working together for you to look at the video, listen to what I'm saying, and your brain is working to try to understand what I'm saying. The hand by itself will not do anything. The eye, if you take it out, it will not do much. When you put it all together, you are functioning. Not perfectly, maybe some days you are more attentive and awake than on other days, but it's a system that works together, right? So let's first read about climate confusion. In southern Australia, there is a region full of abandoned farms. There is not much more left of most of them than a few collapsing walls. The farms were built sometime around 1865, and the people didn't live in them for very long. The farmers had only just come to Australia, and they didn't know the land very well yet, because you have to know how much it rains, what kind of soil it is, what kind of crops can be grown, and all those good things, which takes time. All they knew was that it was very dry in the middle of the country, and that there was more rain close to the sea on the west and the east, and even in the north. So a land surveyor was called in to investigate the areas that were suitable for agriculture. His name was George Goyder, 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 I don't know how it's pronounced. He went out to explore, and after a while he drew a clear line on the map. To the north of this line it is too dry for agriculture, he said, but to the south of that line you are safe to start a farm. Goyder had hardly spoken when the rain came pouring from the sky, including to the north of that line he had just drawn, and said, "To the north you cannot do agriculture." The stubborn farmers had seen all they needed to see. They built their farms far inland from the ocean, in the region where, according to Goyder, it was far too dry for agriculture. They saw one rain and they said, he doesn't know what he's talking about. The harvest was good that year because it had rained, but the years after that, Goyder was proved right. One after another, the farmers realized, this is not where I can do any agriculture and grow anything. So they left their land and headed south. Enough rainfall fell there almost every year in the south of this line, to the south of this line, for a good harvest. So George Goyder, poor man, knew what he was talking about after all, but the farmers just didn't listen to him properly. One rain fooled them, and then they abandoned the farms. The farmers had made a foolish mistake. Of course, they were confusing the weather with the climate. When a climate is dry, it means if you take 10 years, there will be not enough rain for agriculture, but one odd year some rain may fall. If it rains or snows somewhere one day, that doesn't mean it always rains or snows there. The weather varies from one minute to the next, but the climate does not. Weather is about temperature and the precipitation at a particular moment on a particular day, and not the same day every year. So today it may rain, but in next 10 years on that day it may not rain at all. The climate is about the average weather over a period of something like 30 years. You have to watch the season for 30 years before you can see whether it's a wet place or a dry place, whether it's good for agriculture or if it's not good for agriculture. And George Goyder knew how to do that. So he drew a line telling them there is no rain to the north, but there is rain to the south. It's just like with people, really, where you have to know 30 years for, knowing what kind of a person they are. Well, not quite. You can be a very happy person by nature, but sometimes you are just in a bad mood. So on a particular day you may be in a bad mood. That doesn't mean you are a bad person every day. The climate is like your character. The weather is like your mood. Your character is something that determines how you behave year after year for 30 years. People say he's a nice guy, he talks too much and he doesn't listen very well and so on, but on a particular day your mood may be very different, right? So here is George Goiter, who lived from 1826 to 1898, and he was a climate forecaster, and he was in a bad mood, on a grumpy mood sometime, but sunshine follows the rain, said George, and he would get in a good mood. And here is Australia, and he drew a line there and said, don't go north here, stay to the south. And of course you have the Tasman Sea and the Southern Ocean down here, and there is some rain over here, there's some rain over here, and there's some rain over here. But he was down here and he was right, but the farmers didn't believe him and paid a price. So here is a kangaroo, a nice little baby. It is carrying a marsupial with a pouch that carries its baby, unlike the mammals that usually have a placenta and a, where they give birth, inside the uterus and so on and so forth. But let's not go in that direction. So let's leave this here, George Goiter's story, and then come back and talk about what happens when we begin to warm, right? You get the idea. Weather, climate, rain on a few days but not rain every year. So weather and climate, mood and personality. Okay, you may be a cheery personality who gets into a bad mood when it's cloudy like this on a monsoon day, because it sometimes remains cloudy for 10 days, you don't see the sunshine, and so on and so forth. Okay, we'll come back and talk about warming and continue to talk about the impacts of climate change. If climate changed and no bad impacts happened, only good things happened, if a cold place got warmer like Svante Arrhenius was expecting from CO2 increasing, then you may be happy. But soon if it warms too much and it gets too hot and the snow and the ice begins to melt and it starts to rain heavily and so on, you may get into a grumpy mood, right? So we'll come back and talk about what are the things that can go wrong when we keep increasing greenhouse gases and warming the temperatures. Okay, see you.